I'm here and I'm fired up. I'm driving to Oxford right now. I'm gonna put the smack down on Nemo the Virgin because y'all can't do it. Y'all are pulling your punches and trying to be nice to Nemo the Virgin here, and it's making me kind of sick.
He's just a liar.
It's so obvious that Douglas is a bad faith actor.
He's an anti-Mormon.
But is he still a member?
They're just disingenuous.
That's funny. Nemo the Virgin. Did we just birth a new moniker? It's Nemo the Virgin. That is brutal.
Listen up, chaps. I'm only going to say this once. If I responded to everything negative people said about me on the internet, I'd be doing nothing else all day. But before you get your tiny violins out, don't bother. This is my job, and I signed up for this. I'm expressing my views and sharing information on the internet. What else would one reasonably expect? And while the ad hominem attacks are uncalled for, I do expect to receive pushback on my positions. I welcome respectful challenges, and over the years have apologised and set the record straight where necessary. That's because when I left behind Mormon orthodoxy, I also left behind the need to be right about everything. I started generally to ask more questions and make fewer assertions. And so if somebody criticises a video I made or something I've done, I rarely feel the need to respond, because I trust that my audience can weigh up the criticism against my original video and work out what's what. But the video that we're about to watch makes so many false and frankly defamatory claims about me that I feel I should respond. If any of these things come up again, I've at least answered them in this video. And we are going to get into the minutiae with this, so sit back and enjoy. The video we're looking at comes from a YouTube channel called Thoughtful Faith. The thumbnail of this video states that I am a bad faith actor, and is devoid of anything that would seem to frame this as a question. The creators of this video are therefore making a declarative statement to the world that I am a bad faith actor. I hope they've been thoughtful enough to include some evidence that I have intentionally acted in bad faith at all. The video is titled Nemo the Mormon, the disingenuous hero of anti-Mormonism. To claim someone is disingenuous is to make a statement about their intentions. Rebutting an individual's claims is one thing, but if you want to make statements about what is in the heart, or a person's intentions, you really need some strong evidence. Or you need to be willing to question the individual directly about their intentions. Now, in fairness to Jacob Hansen, one of the creators of the video we are about to see, apparently he did try to get in touch with me to discuss my excommunication directly. He didn't try as hard as to, go on my channel page and get my email address, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he was sincerely trying to contact me and not just creating the illusion of trying to contact me so that he could then go ahead and work on this video with Hayden Carroll.
Here's the thing I don't like about Nemo, and they're just disingenuous. I made the video about it. Hayden and I worked together on it.
Either way, I do hope they have provided some evidence that I've been disingenuous. If we take a look at the description of the video, we see it's devoid of sources or references, but maybe they'll give citations and references in the video itself. They do helpfully explain what bad faith is in a way I'm sure we've all used in sacrament talks, the Merriam Webster dictionary. Bad faith, lack of honesty in dealing with other people. In calling me a bad faith actor, they are, with this definition, calling me dishonest. Again, I hope they provide some evidence of this dishonesty in the video. Here's what the description does say. If a person is seeking to undermine the goals of a private institution, should the institution be allowed to kick them out? If a private institution believes someone is undermining their goals, I can certainly see how one would make the argument that they should be removed. Insofar as I've understood the private institution in that phrase is analogous for the church, then the implication here seems to be that I am seeking to undermine the goals of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I would then ask that given I have advocated for honesty and accountability from church leaders, how exactly does that undermine the goals of the church? Phrased differently, how are institutional honesty and accountability incompatible with the goals of the church? And that's to say nothing of the implication that I am seeking to undermine the church's goals. It will be interesting to see what evidence he presents that undermining the goals of a private institution was something which I sought after. Douglas Stogo, aka Nemo the Mormon, is facing a membership council and some believe he is innocent. Do you? Let's see if they answer any of this in the actual video. Roll the tape.
Hey everyone, my name's Hayden. I'm a contributor here at Thoughtful Faith, and I want to start out today's video with an example. I want you to imagine for a moment that at your local university, there was a Kamala Harris fan club. The entire goal of this club was to get Kamala Harris elected President of the United States.
The analogous organisation to the Kamala Harris fan club in this instance is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's the Jesus fan club. And what is the entire goal of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? The church's website answers this one. The mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to help all of God's children come to Jesus through learning about his gospel, making and keeping promises with God, covenants, and practicing Christ-like love and service. In this context, mission and goal seem synonymous enough to serve the purpose of establishing the goal of the church.
In this group, there was a student named Steve, and eventually Steve decided he no longer wanted Kamala Harris to be president.
I assume I'm meant to be Steve in this analogy? The problem is, I haven't decided that I don't want God's children to come to Jesus Christ through learning about his gospel, making and keeping covenants, or practicing Christ-like love and service. In fact, many of my criticisms of the church are on the ways in which the church is hampering its own ability to fulfill its stated goals. For example, it is supportive of increasing Christ-like love and service to draw attention to the church's lack of charitable spending compared to its real estate purchases and the size of its wealth reserves. And now I can hear the arguments being made that my criticisms, whether I intend it or not, are undermining the goals of the Jesus fan club. Firstly, this would undermine Hayden's point that I'm doing this intentionally. And secondly, a discussion must then be had around whether success at all costs is a morally justifiable doctrine. It remains my belief that the church should not achieve its goals at the expense of its morals, and it will best succeed in its goals by rooting out immoral behaviour in its leadership structures. A key example of this is when I called for church discipline against any church leaders who oversaw the creation of 13 clone LLCs or shell companies that caused the church to be fined $5 million by the SEC. That is because not only is it just morally wrong to have broken the law with money, but I do not think that it is the way in which Jesus would want the goal of bringing people unto Christ to be achieved. Ill-gotten gains isn't just the returns from gambling, it must surely also include money that has been handled in a way that is contrary to the laws of the land. Does not render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's apply here? Church discipline is also what we would just naturally expect for any ward or state clerk if they handled funds in such a way as to cause an SEC investigation.
But instead of leaving the club, he decided that it would be better if he stayed in it. This way, he could act as an insider who could work with Trump supporters to expose how terrible the Kamala Harris organization is.
Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack here. He correctly identifies that I chose not to leave, and he seems to imply that if one no longer wants the organization to achieve its goal, they should probably leave it. But as we've just discussed, I don't want the church to fail in its stated mission. So why would I leave? Why would a member of the Kamala Harris organization leave if they still wanted her to be president, but saw ways in which members of the organization, even Kamala herself, were undermining that goal through morally questionable behavior? Then we have this part about working with Trump supporters. This seems like a strange type of guilt by association, criticizing who someone works with rather than the work that they actually do. This type of tribalism undermines healthy and productive discourse on many issues, political and religious.
After making multiple videos for the Trump campaign,
his example is really starting to fall apart at this point. I haven't made any videos for the Trump campaign. I have appeared alongside members of that campaign discussing the issues with the Harris campaign as one who wants the Harris campaign to be better than it is. To clarify, I have appeared on platforms like Mormon Stories and Zelph on the Shelf to discuss issues with the church from my perspective as an insider, and as one of the few insiders willing to talk bluntly about the issues of the church, unfettered by the sort of tribalism that would cause one to stay their tongue to appear at all times supportive of their team. The question here seems to be, does there need to be uniformity and conformity within the fan club, whether it be Kamala Harris or Jesus? Hayden certainly seems to be advocating for a very conformist view of group membership. I happen to believe in a less conformist vision of group membership. Hayden and I can disagree on the level of conformity required to remain within a group without either of us acting in bad faith.
After making multiple videos for the Trump campaign, the leaders of the Kamala Harris fan club decided to remove Steve's name from its records so he could no longer claim to be an insider.
Hayden has, perhaps inadvertently, or perhaps rather astutely, pointed to the crux of my excommunication. I was, by all appearances, excommunicated on PR grounds. I was excommunicated because what I said about the Jesus fan club was not acceptable to, or under the control of, the senior brethren in Salt Lake, the leaders of the club. But to continue in Hayden's analogy, what would you think of the Kamala Harris fan club if they kicked someone out who was attempting to improve that club by speaking out as a member of the club on the club's issues? It would tell you at the very least that the Kamala Harris fan club has no interest in addressing the concerns raised by insiders in a public setting. And when the Jesus fan club has no interest in addressing the immoral behaviour of its leaders, in that they lie and hide money, you would begin to ask if this Jesus fan club really is that interested in Jesus, or if there was some other motivation at play.
Steve was outraged and said that he could not believe that he was being kicked out of a group that he wanted to be a member of.
Yes, I was outraged. I was outraged that I was excommunicated for apostasy by a council that failed to prove that apostasy by its own definitions, and that this council was presided over by a stake president who had repeatedly reassured me that I was not in apostasy.
The Trump supporters as well joined in and said that he should not be removed from the club simply for telling the truth about Kamala Harris and her organization.
Again, we are back to the tribalism, the us versus them thinking. It doesn't matter who was saying my excommunication was wrong, it matters if they have a good reason for that claim. Should one be kicked out of an organization simply for telling the truth about that organization? What does it say about an organization if it finds the truth threatening? Also, for the record, I had many active temple recommend holding Latter-day Saints write letters to my stake presidency in support of my continued membership. I say this not as an appeal to popularity, but as a statement that I had bipartisan support for my continued church membership.
So here's the question. Was Steve actually being wronged? Does a person have a right to be in a private organization that they are actively seeking to undermine?
I don't think the goals of the church are undermined by honest criticism at all.
Anyone who's acting in good faith will say that a private organization has every right to kick out people who are seeking to undermine its goals.
Hayden presents it as self-evidently true that those acting in good faith will hold a certain position on organizational management. But that's just not true. If we accept good faith to be the antonym of bad faith, then according to the definition provided by thoughtful faith, good faith, presence of honesty in dealing with other people. Someone's opinions on the rights of organizations to govern their own membership has nothing to do with their honesty in dealing with others. Someone's honesty and their opinion on organizational management are not, by necessity, correlated. This is because there is fundamentally a difference between honesty and logical consistency. People can and often do honestly hold positions that are not logically consistent. Take this video that's been produced by Hayden and Jacob. I'm going to assume they're acting in good faith, that they honestly believe the positions they hold about me, but I'm also going to show how those positions, as honestly held as they may be, are deeply flawed in their logic.
Furthermore, a person who pretends to be a member of an organization while acting against that organization's goals is the very definition of a disingenuous bad faith actor.
Hayden provided the definition of a bad faith actor in the description, and now he's added disingenuous to appeal to his preferred dictionary, Merriam Webster, lacking in candor, also giving a false appearance of simple frankness. I agree with Hayden that someone who pretends to be a member of an organization while acting against the organization's goals is a bad faith actor, because they are pretending to be something they are not, and therefore are not being honest, and they may enact this dishonesty by means of a lack of candor or giving the false appearance of simple frankness. However, knowing that this opening example is about to be linked to me by the phrase,
"Well, I'd like you to meet Douglas Stilgo,"
it should be clear that I never pretended to be a member of the church, because Hayden himself just spent the past minute setting up an analogy in which he repeatedly calls me a member of the group that was analogous to the church. So he's either used an analogy about a member of an organization to describe me, who he believes is not a member of the analogous organization, which would just be a very poor choice of analogy given such a basic discrepancy. Or he is deliberately and recklessly accusing me of dishonesty about my membership, without regard for the information he just shared. I really hope it's the former, that Hayden has just chosen a really bad analogy.
So does this happen in the church? Well, I'd like you to meet Douglas Stilgo, who is better known on YouTube as Nemo the Mormon. Recently, he went on an anti-Mormon podcast to talk not only how he lost his belief in the fundamental doctrines of the church, but his outrage at being lied to over and over by church leaders.
The word recently is doing some very heavy lifting here, Hayden. I didn't recently go on anything as represented by the clip you're about to show, because at the time you made this video about me, that clip was over 2.5 years old. It's now exactly 3 years old at the time of this recording. And as for me losing belief in the fundamental doctrines of the church, that is just wrong. The video he's about to show a clip from does not contain any statements by me to that effect. I expressed that my relationship to the doctrines of the church is complex, and it's interesting that Hayden didn't include that statement. Yeah, I angrily typed out my resignation letter. I was ready to leave, and then I kind of had this wake up call moment. No, yeah, right. The church, that's their job to deal with me. If they've lied to me, like, okay, let's take it to them then, rather than kind of just bowing out in a rage. I thought, no, I can do something about this. So there's still nothing here about
how he lost his belief in the fundamental doctrines of the church.
I will be producing a video soon that will go into why I wanted to stay and the state of my beliefs, a topic I've been somewhat coy about until now. But at the moment, all there is to say is that there is nothing in this recent clip about how I
lost his belief in the fundamental doctrines of the church.
That assessment did not represent my position at the time. Perhaps Hayden is not willing to hold space for an orthodox belief. Maybe it's that tribalism again that requires him to label anyone who's not 100% orthodox as no longer believing anything. But I really do hope he isn't engaging in that kind of binary thinking. Unorthodoxy, or even uncertainty regarding one's beliefs, is not the same as a loss of those beliefs. I'm therefore not like the Trump supporter in the opening analogy, who Hayden paints as having lost complete faith in the cause. Hayden is correct, however, that this clip contained
outrage at being lied to over and over by church leaders.
And I do find it interesting that Hayden does not push back on my assertion that church leaders are lying. This is a recurring theme, that Hayden plays clips of my assertions without challenge. I don't want to make an argument from silence and assume that he agrees with my assertions. I doubt that's quite right. But it is fascinating that he and Jacob have spent so much time challenging my character and so very little time challenging my claims.
Douglas has spent the last few years making entire videos seeking to weaken faith in various church policies, practices, and doctrines, like the authenticity of the Book of Mormon.
The claim here is that I have been seeking to weaken faith in various church policies, practices, and doctrines. That is a huge statement to make about my intentions, and it's simply not true. The video Hayden is about to show 2 clips from was released on February the 28th, 2021. This is a time when my videos were mostly academic exercises in logic, meaning I was assessing the logical consistency of the claims of apologists. I wasn't directly taking a position on the truth claims of the church, rather I was taking a position on the arguments employed by apologists. And while the geography may be internally consistent, no archaeologists have ever managed to pin down any of the locations from the Book of Mormon on terra firma. This is just a statement of fact. Again, it's interesting to me that Hayden leaves in so many moments like this without answering them. And the irony here is that the same side making an argument from incredulity is then asking people to believe an equally incredulous narrative, that an angel gave Joseph golden plates that detailed the lives of the ancient inhabitants of America, despite archaeological and genetic evidence to the contrary. In this particular instance, I was making the point that if apologists like David Snell for Saints Unscripted want to make an argument for incredulity to say Joseph couldn't possibly have memorized the Book of Mormon because it's too difficult to believe, that is deeply ironic, given the alternative narrative is also incredulous because it contains miracles and angelic visitations and the like. I explain this in the video, an explanation that for whatever reason Hayden decided not to include in its entirety. Summing up, most of this is an argument from incredulity. Just because you find it difficult to believe that Joseph could have written the Book of Mormon from his mind does not make it a false premise. We must be careful not to project our own mental limitations onto Joseph. And the irony here is that the same side making an argument from incredulity is then asking people to believe an equally incredulous narrative. This is a point about why arguing from incredulity is logically flawed, not about whether the Book of Mormon is true or not.
He also unapologetically compares Joseph Smith to child molesters in front of tens of thousands of people online.
Yes and no. In the first clip he uses, I didn't make that comparison at all. In the second clip, I did compare Joseph Smith to Warren Jeffs, and I did so unapologetically. It sounds like a 37-year-old man having sex with a 14-year-old child. What sounds like that? Hayden didn't include the footage that identifies the subject of my remark. I guess we're going to have to listen to the full clip.
People are uncomfortable with the fact that Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old, mainly because marriage usually implies a sexual relationship, and Joseph Smith having a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old sounds super inappropriate.
It sounds more than just super inappropriate. It sounds like a 37-year-old man having sex with a 14-year-old child. Oh, so what I was actually saying was David Snell's description of a hypothetical sexual relationship between a 37-year-old Joseph Smith and a 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball as super inappropriate didn't quite capture the gravity of the age gap and the power dynamic. You want to compare Joseph Smith and Warren Jeffs? Actually, they had a similar number of polygamous wives, which again is a detail that the church doesn't really like to talk about. But they were similar in their sort of practice of polygamy, and the age ranges are broadly similar as well. There is some wiggle room in the ambiguousness of the word similar, but I'm not going to claim it to try and avoid accepting that I should have been more careful in my wording. Lad Bible rightly put the numbers on screen to ensure the number of wives was very clear. In my defense, I was speaking for an hour in rapid-fire fashion, answering question after question, but I hold myself to a high standard, and that was a slip I'm glad was caught, and had it been on my own video, I would have re-recorded before it went to air. The overall point still stands though. When it comes to polygamy, Joseph Smith and Warren Jeffs are more similar than the church would care to acknowledge, while of course the word similar, by necessity, implies they do diverge in some ways.
And it doesn't just stop with Joseph Smith. He implies sexual misconduct by our modern apostles.
People are quick to cry at me, "You've taken that out of context." But that's the reason I always provide the sources where available in the description of my videos. It's not possible to play the full conference talk or whatever I'm analysing within the confines of a YouTube video. But I would encourage anyone who thinks anything I've critiqued may have had its meaning changed in context to go to the sources and prove that point. I find it interesting that so far, the Thoughtful Faith team have not provided any sources or citations for any of the clips of mine they've used. And more than once, I've gone to the original video and seen that they've indeed taken things out of context. I have a feeling this next clip may be the same story. The Internet Archive has the original picture, and if I'm honest, it creeps me out. This is D. Todd Christofferson with 8-year-old Jamie Ortega Porras. That hand position is questionable, shall we say. I said I find this picture creepy, because I do. Everything about it creeps me out, from the way he's standing over her, the way it reminds me of actual child bride photos, and yes, the questionable hand positioning of this picture. And as you'll see, the full short was about how the church likely saw the issues with the picture and took it down. The internet never forgets. This is true of the church news article announcing the dedication of the Lima, Peru Los Olivos temple. Looking at it now, you'd think nothing of it. However, that's because the church has changed the lead picture for the article. The Internet Archive has the original picture, and if I'm honest, it creeps me out. This is D. Todd Christofferson with 8-year-old Jamie Ortega Porras. That hand position is questionable, shall we say. In removing that picture, they have now included a picture of the young girl with her mother in a slightly less questionable position. I don't know if they think it's similar enough for it to pass under the radar, but like I said, the internet never forgets. Again, in the full context of the short, I'm not sure what I said
implies sexual misconduct by our modern apostles.
But some people did take that from my video, and so the very next day, in a short that Hayden hasn't included, I said this. I want to clear a couple of things up in regard to my short video on this picture. Here is what I wasn't saying. I wasn't saying that D. Todd Christofferson is some kind of sexual deviant. I wasn't saying that he was intentionally holding her hand near his crotch. And I wasn't saying that the image itself is some sort of big scandal. What I was trying to say was the end result of a poorly framed, timed, and posed photo came across to me as creepy. The church was clearly in agreement with me that the picture did not come across well, because they removed it very quickly, replacing it overnight with a similar picture, this time including the girl's mother. And finally, I was making the point that the internet never forgets these things, so they should probably tighten up their PR so these kinds of poorly posed photos don't make it out in the first place. So because the internet never forgets, and I have a keen sense of irony, I'm going to leave the old video up and just say I'm sorry that I didn't get it right the first time. I'm certainly not going to remove it overnight, replace it with a similar video, and hope you don't notice. That's right, Hayden wants you to think I've made a video which
implies sexual misconduct by our modern apostles,
without acknowledging that the very next day, I put out a video to make sure that the exact thing he accuses me of implying would not be people's understanding.
He even recently went on Lad Bible, a UK-based media outlet whose YouTube channel has over 3 million subscribers, representing himself as a member of the church who is going to give honest answers about the church.
Hi, I'm Nemo, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm here to answer the questions in the honesty box. That's all correct, although I'm not sure why you use the specific phrasing,
representing himself as a member of the church.
Did you mean to imply that I wasn't a member but was putting myself across as one dishonestly? If so, that would be incorrect, as I was not excommunicated until the 30th of September 2024. I recorded the Lad Bible video on the 28th of June 2024, and it aired on the 7th of August 2024. I was still very much an active member at the time of filming and airing. Are you brainwashed? Yeah, I guess, which is weird because you wouldn't recognize it if you were, but I think certainly indoctrinated is maybe a better word. You are indoctrinated from a very early age in the earliest church. You're taught that this is the way the world is. I don't see the problem with this. Indoctrination, by definition, is part of any religious upbringing. Here's an example. When Brad Wilcox says,
it's actually what most people in the world are doing. They're playing church. They're sincere. They want it to count. But they don't have the authority. They don't have God's permission.
Is that not the promotion of a partisan or sectarian belief, that as members of the church we have a religious belief system that is distinct from others? I think the surprise here comes from the fact that many religious individuals wouldn't readily admit to being indoctrinated. My willingness to admit to this has nothing to do with my honesty and everything to do with my orthodoxy or lack thereof.
He is literally making a living by doing this.
So, got to be honest about these things. My position with the church is somewhat of an interesting one. My full-time job is commentating on the church. Yes, I am making a living doing this. This being talking online about my experience as a member of the church and my criticisms of the church. You may disagree with my commentary and criticisms, although you haven't raised any counterpoints to them yet, but commentating on the church is indeed my full-time job. And it could one day be yours too, if it isn't already, as your channel is growing quite well. Do you have a more specific point to make about why making a living this way is problematic?
But he does a whole lot more than just comment on the church. He engages in full-blown action against it.
So I'm creating a movement of people voting opposed because internal dissent within the church will make a difference. And then when they've got an internal rebellion on their hands, they may well just turn around and try and pacify it. Given that the First Presidency have committed a serious sin while in a public and notable position as members of the church, I'm sending these letters to their bishops and stake presidents to call for church discipline. My letter calling for church discipline against those involved in the Mormon SEC scandal is getting traction. It has been shared now in several stakes worldwide by others, and I myself have sent it to every stake president in the United Kingdom. Voting opposed and encouraging others to do so, what I called somewhat hyperbolically a rebellion, is just part of the church's system of common consent. Unfortunately, there is a culture of people not voting opposed despite knowing of problems with those put forward for the calling. My goal was in part to break this stigma and encourage others to engage in the common consent system to the point where church leaders take notice. We've already discussed how my actions are often in support of the church's own stated goals, not against them. That is the case in the footage of me calling for church discipline against men who handled money in ways that caused the church to be fined by the SEC. Going back to your opening analogy, Hayden, do you think it undermines the goals of the church to hold men accountable who mishandle sacred offerings this way? If so, what do you think that says about the goals of the church?
Do you pay tithing?
Not to the church, no. I send it to charity instead. I started a petition to tell the church that you should listen to Joseph F. Smith, in that we will envisage a time where you won't have to make donations to the church anymore. And so I started a petition that is still growing in signatures where I'm saying, look, the time is now. And what is wrong with a petition that elevates the teachings of Joseph F. Smith? If revelation comes once we study it out in our mind, then what is wrong with a petition calling for the leaders of the church to study this issue out? I've linked the petition in the description, and I don't think you'll find anything problematic in its wording. And just on a point of transparency, I'm planning new ways of donating to charity with this channel, leaving behind the tithing model. So I do not pay 10% of my income to charity at this time. But on the subject of money and donations, if you would like to support this work, $5, $10, $20 a month, or whatever you can afford, at the donor box link in the description will help me continue to
making a living by doing this. This all makes sense when you realize Douglas is not just claiming the church is false, he's claiming that it's abusive.
I have a feeling I'm not about to make either of those claims. The first was about the spiritual abuse. Guys, don't worry about me. I voluntarily choose to engage in a spiritually abusive relationship with my church leaders so that you don't have to. In the same way, I watch General Conference so you don't have to. You have shown no evidence that I claimed the church is false. As for the claim that it is abusive, I didn't make that claim either. Instead, I talked about engaging in a spiritually abusive relationship with my church leaders, which is true. The process I went through and the hoops I had to jump through to get my concerns heard at all, the long silences from my stake president, the constant threat of excommunication like a Damoclean sword, mingled with assurances that I wasn't in apostasy, assurances which ultimately turned out to be false assurances, sounds like a pretty spiritually abusive relationship to me. You may disagree with my assessment, Hayden, but again, it was my honestly held opinion of my experience with my leaders.
And he so proudly films himself publicly opposing the prophet and local leaders.
Russell M. Nelson as prophet, seer, and revelator, and those opposed may so manifest it.
I oppose.
Any opposed, manifest it.
I oppose. Hayden here saying,
he so proudly films himself publicly opposing the prophet and local leaders,
is emblematic of that stigma around opposing votes that I talked about before. We are asked if there are any opposed, and so should it really cause such a reaction that someone does? And again, if it does cause a stir, what does that say about the complacency or perhaps even active suppression of dissent that has crept into the church's system of checks and balances? Could that possibly be a reason to film oneself, to set an example that it can be done when necessary? It is also ultimately hypocritical to be upset at the filming of an opposing vote when the church proudly broadcasts sustaining votes to millions every 6 months.
All in favor, please manifest it. Contrary, if there be any by the same sign.
Douglas has the right to do this.
Oh, thank you.
But then says it's unfair that he is not allowed into the temple, and says one of his goals is to create a space for people to attend the temple without meeting worthiness standards.
Okay, Here we go. The way this is phrased makes it sound like I think people should be able to enter the temple willy-nilly. That's just not the case. I'm all for a moral standard of cleanliness or worthiness to enter a sacred space like the temple. However, I have specifically argued that neither opposing church leaders in a sustaining vote nor the non-payment of tithing directly to the church are moral issues. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me, means that if one were to pay tithes directly to charity instead of to the church, you still haven't robbed God. I have also argued that the requirement to sustain church leaders against one's conscience and knowledge of their wrongdoing in order to enter into the highest degrees of worship and achieve exaltation comes perilously close to Satan's plan as presented in the pre-existence. But simpler than that, there is just no moral sin or uncleanliness that comes from participating in the common consent system and casting an opposing vote when you have knowledge of immoral behaviour. And at the moment, they have to stay completely quiet, and I'm trying to model the space where they could actually be honest. Because what they're having to do currently is be dishonest in order to get along. They're having to lie their way through a temple recommend, saying they sustain people they don't, saying they pay tithing when they don't, or whatever it might be. And I'm trying to model that position of, no, I'm going to go into a temple recommend interview. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say I don't sustain them. I'm going to say that I don't pay tithing to the LDS church. But I have a desire to worship in the house of the Lord. And I said, well, fine, then it shouldn't matter how I answer the questions. Because he said the most important question is the one where do you consider yourself worthy? I said yes. And he's like, well, okay. And I said, well, then it shouldn't matter how I answer the questions. I won't ascribe malice to that sudden switch between two conversations, but I will clarify that this is two separate discussions that are being shown here. In the first, I made the point that there are members of the church with a desire to worship in the temple, but with reservations about the financial behaviour of the church, which causes them not to pay tithing directly to the church, or with reservations about the behaviour of senior church leaders, which causes them to oppose the sustaining of those leaders. My point was, under the current paradigm, these members are forced to either lie in their interview to maintain a recommend, or lose out on their ability to worship fully. As previously stated, I was trying to advocate for the ability of these members to be honest and still worship in the house of the Lord. The second clip, once again, needs to be played a bit more fully. He said the most important question is the one where do you consider yourself worthy? I said yes. And he's like, well, okay. And I said, well, then it shouldn't matter how I answer the questions. Hayden cuts this clip off just before I say, because if the bishop can use his discernment and see that I am therefore worthy to enter the temple, then just because I can't say the right answers to the right questions, his discernment should trump that, surely. So we now see I was making the point that the bishop's gift of discernment trumps the individual's answers to the questions, particularly in the case where an individual considers himself worthy to enter the temple. Hayden cut this clip short, it would seem, in an attempt to paint it as though I just don't think the answers to recommend questions matter. He also started the clip mid-sentence, missing the beginning where I identified who I was talking to, which for clarity was my bishop.
So when Douglas could not get into the temple himself, he decided to help host a show where they interviewed members who secretly went in to film the temple ceremonies multiple times so they could broadcast them online.
Hayden was more thoughtful here than Jacob Hansen, who claimed in a different video,
Nemo, on the other hand, got excommunicated for things like broadcasting sacred temple ceremonies on the internet.
I was not excommunicated for this. This was not brought up in my membership council as evidence against me. Jacob has just openly lied about why I was excommunicated in a video where he asked me to
please be more careful in the future when making public claims.
Anyway, what did happen is more in line with how Hayden described it. I appeared alongside another YouTuber, PD, as we interviewed a couple who had secretly recorded the endowment ceremony, and in that video, parts of the endowment presentation were shown. Now, Hayden appears to imply my participation in that video was a reaction to my denial of a temple recommend, and it just wasn't. But was it in good judgment? Was it the right thing for me to do? I have been thinking about this quite a lot. I personally think it's possible to be very open about what goes on in the temple. There are only some very limited things that you covenant not to reveal. I don't believe any of those things were shown in the video that PD shared. There was discussion about the temple names, which are available online, but I don't believe I broke any of my own temple covenants as I understood them in this video. And that brings us back to the point at hand, which is that at that point in time, I was an endowed member of the church. And if this were a video about Nemo as a bad Mormon, Jacob and Hayden may well have a point. I've never claimed to be a perfect member of the church, or even an orthodox one post-2020. But there is nothing dishonest or bad faith about one member of an organization having a more unorthodox approach to traditional norms around sanctity than another. I may have been unwise to do it. That would have been for my leaders to censor me, and they never did.
So we went through and did it a second time, and by the second time, I was so confident going in, because that first time I was super nervous But by the time we walked out, I realized that no one had noticed. No one even cared. Everyone was just there, focused on the screen or focused on their own, fixing their outfits.
Here I am smiling and cringing at the audacity of the individual I was talking to. A secret recording of the temple ceremony is something I could never and would never do myself. At the beginning of the recording that you've made, it says that the covenants have not changed, which is just untrue. But it's an unprovable claim without records like this. If no one ever recorded the endowment ceremony, then they would be able to make that claim, and hardly anyone's going to find out that it's untrue because they have nothing to compare it to.
Well, for those people that haven't seen it.
This is why I think having a record of the temple endowment is important, because we're able to better prove when the church tries to be dishonest about covenants not changing.
The gospel of Jesus Christ does not change. Gospel doctrine does not change. Our personal covenants do not change.
If the church weren't dishonest about the endowment, then I wouldn't feel the need for this level of transparency. But as a then member of the church who was advocating for openness, honesty, and transparency, it followed that I would appreciate recordings being available to facilitate such openness, honesty, and transparency. And if that level of openness, honesty, and transparency isn't part of your value structure, I totally get it. We are, after all, different people. But again, it doesn't speak to my honesty or my candor that I have a different view to you on subjects like sanctity and transparency.
Now, they went on to play the temple video, but obviously I won't show that out of respect.
This makes clear Hayden's position on sharing the endowment, and I appreciate and respect that position. Mine just happens to be different, and that difference didn't make me any less of a member of the church.
So why is he doing this?
Why am I doing what? What is this? What is the it you're talking about? Hayden, you need to say the thing rather than just implying the incredulity.
So why is he doing this? It's because being an insider gives you major advantages.
Oh, they can't excommunicate me. Essentially, I'm excommunicatable at the moment for various reasons. And so I kind of use that to really try and push some change within the system. Because every time I think I've done something that they'll excommunicate me for, they don't. So I'm very happy with that arrangement. The fact that this is clearly some tongue-in-cheek bravado to one side, I was indeed using the fact that through constant communication with my stake president and bishop, I was doing my best to avoid apostasy, and it was understood I would not be excommunicated for simply telling the truth or having an opinion. Of course, the assurances turned out to be false, as they never proved any apostasy to the satisfaction of their own charges. It is also true that being an insider has advantages. For example, remaining a member of the church allowed me to engage with the church's system of common consent and raise my concerns through the church's own system. As is well documented by now, my concerns reached the desk of Dallin H. Oakes, and his reply was inadequate, bordering on dishonest. None of what Jacob and Hayden have shared so far shows me to be anything other than an unorthodox member of the church, which until recently was the bio of my Instagram. I have never hidden my heterodoxy from people, and in case it wasn't obvious, heterodox members of the church are still members of the church.
Douglas literally flew all the way to Texas just so he could go on record implying his good standing membership, while opposing the church's temple plans.
There was no good standing to imply, because I wasn't facing any formal membership restrictions at the time. I was a member in good standing, attending sacrament meeting and priesthood meetings, and actively seeking to resolve the issues restricting my access to the temple. And after I got back from Texas, I met with my stake president, and he provided me with yet another reassurance. I'm not pointing to Texas as something that's of particular concern. I did oppose the church's temple plans, because the church, particularly John Cannon, was encouraging members to be dishonest with the town and claimed the height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. I went on record to explain how this was false, and how my position was actually supported by the current prophets, apostles, and leaders of the church. Hayden clearly didn't think it necessary to include any of the footage where I quote Russell M. Nelson, David A. Bednar, or Gerard Corset. And on this implication that I was somehow deceiving the town council of Fairview, they were not concerned with how exactly I enacted my LDS faith or how orthodox I was. In fact, my heterodoxy must have been fairly obvious to them, given the thousands of Latter-day Saints on site at that meeting who were in favour of having the temple built on the basis of John Cannon's claim about steeple height. The town council instead were concerned with whether I was qualified to speak on the issue of religious observance in LDS temples, which I was more than qualified to do, especially as my position was backed up by the words of the current church leaders. I still support the building of a temple in Fairview, Texas. I just don't support it being built through lies and threats. I think the church has shown in places like Paris and Belgium they are able to be a better neighbour than that.
And of course, this was all to the cheers of John Dehlin, Bill Reel, and some of the other big names in anti-Mormonism who literally claimed him as, quote, one of their own.
Douglas Stilgo? That his name?
That's our very own Nemo the Mormon.
Yay!
All the way.
Here he comes, direct from England. Hello, there he is.
My name is Douglas Stilgo, and I travelled here from Oxford, England. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a graduate of the Church's seminary program. I'm a returned missionary, and I'm also the UK's leading commentator on the Church.
It doesn't matter who supports my position, it matters if my position is correct. Again, this tribalism is coming out, with Hayden seeming to imply that because prominent ex-Mormons support what I do, it must necessarily, and at the exclusion of all other considerations, mean that what I'm doing is somehow unbecoming of a church member.
What is going on here is so obvious, it's embarrassing.
I agree with you. What is going on here is so obvious, it's embarrassing. However, you and I clearly disagree on what's going on here. You seem to think you're landing blow after blow on my credibility, when what you've actually done is provide example after example of my heterodoxy, which I've never sought to hide. Putting so much effort into exposing something so openly known is indeed embarrassing.
It's a perfect litmus test, too. It's so obvious that Douglas is a bad faith actor that you can be sure that anyone who denies this is a bad faith actor themselves.
The statement that anyone who denies I am a bad faith actor is themselves a bad faith actor seems like nothing more than an attempt to poison the well against anyone who may disagree with Hayden's opinions about me. But again, Hayden doesn't acknowledge the possibility that one can disagree with the assertion that I'm a bad faith actor in a way that is honest. This honesty would by definition preclude them from being a bad faith actor themselves. Worded more plainly, Hayden draws the conclusion that I am so obviously dishonest, despite providing no evidence of my dishonesty, that anyone who disagrees with that assessment of me must be in themselves dishonest. Do we see just how bizarre that kind of thinking is? Do we not see the hubris in claiming to be so unassailably correct that anyone who disagrees must be a dishonest person?
Anyone who claims they can't see what's going on here and who thinks the church is wrong to take action against Douglas only exposes themselves.
Again, this is totally fallacious. Anyone who claims they can't see what's going on here may just have correctly identified your lack of evidence to show dishonesty on my part. They may have just correctly identified that your conclusions are not supported by your evidence. And anyone who thinks the church is wrong to take action against me may again simply disagree with your view of organizational management. And they can do so honestly. Someone believing differently than you do, even in your own church, does not make them inherently dishonest. And what do they expose themselves as exactly? A bad faith actor, like you said a moment ago? If so, you once again seem to misunderstand the fundamental difference between someone disagreeing with you and your conclusions and someone being dishonest with you and themselves.
Douglas himself knows what he is doing.
I do know what I'm doing, but it's not what you're accusing me of. In this video produced by Jacob and Hayden, they have accused me of pretending to be a member of the church or in some way falsely portraying my membership in the church. This is false. Of being dishonest or a bad faith actor. This is false. Of losing my faith in the basic doctrines of the church. This is false.
Douglas himself knows what he is doing, and it's time to stop taking people seriously who pretend Nemo the Mormon is a good faith actor.
Again, it's another attempt to poison the well by saying that those who say I am a good faith actor do not need to be taken seriously because they're just pretending. Does Hayden have any evidence at all that this is the case? Does he have any evidence that they are just pretending?
And we and I will be with you in spirit at your council, and maybe we'll have a closer approximation as to when it will be as time progresses. But I understand it will be next week, sometime after Tuesday, because that's the deadline for everybody to get in their emails to your stake president, which are to be sent to Nemo is innocent. Nemo is innocent at gmail.com. Yeah, look at this. All this. Amen, RFM. Yes. Everybody loves Nemo.
I don't know what the point of this clip is, other than to perhaps show some of those who think I'm a good faith actor that Hayden thinks we do not need to take seriously.
Not just that, there's thousands of pedophiles in the Mormon church, thousands of members of the church that have committed financial fraud, and all sorts of heinous crimes, rape, abuse, that the Mormon church has protected, not excommunicated, and even offered legal support to protect them and to cover up their crimes. So the Mormon church treats rapists and pedophiles and child abusers better than it's treating you, an honest, conscientious critic. I think that's just objectively true.
Mm-hmm. Why did Hayden cut off my next sentence where I offered some evidence in support of John's point? Mm-hmm. Well, what was it? $300,000 they offered to one victim to keep them quiet about something or other, right?
Yeah.
They've not offered me that scale of money to stop talking about this. And while I'm not in possession of the facts with which I could defend the point John made down to the very last detail, I do agree with the broader point that there are people the church haven't excommunicated who have done much worse things than me. But if that were my only defense, it would be some variant of the tu quoque fallacy. Just because other people have done worse things than me doesn't mean that I haven't done something worthy of excommunication. It's a good job then that that isn't my only defense. I've done plenty of videos on why I shouldn't have been excommunicated, so we won't go into that here, but feel free to watch them as linked in the description. Because apparently you can't seek after the truth in this church, not without being punished. So why don't they just go the whole hog and excommunicate me? They don't need to excommunicate me with all the negative PR that would come with. The church also probably feels like they have more control over me, because at the moment they feel they can micromanage every aspect of my church participation. But you know what? They can't. I am still a member of this church, something that everyone celebrated as my choice when I was 8 years old. I will continue to use my priesthood and my membership in this church to make a difference. And if they want that to stop, they will have to take it from me. And they did take it from me. After saying they wouldn't for a long time after the video that Hayden just showed you, the church eventually decided they didn't want me to continue as a member.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button so my future videos show up on your feed. Also, if you or someone that you know has benefited from the content here on Thoughtful Faith, please consider becoming a channel donor or volunteer by visiting my new website, thoughtfulfaith.org, and clicking on the Get Involved page.
We watched that last part just for completeness, so no one can say I left something out. We had the time code running across the bottom of the screen at all times, so not a single frame was lost. This entire video could be summed up with the phrase, and therefore what? Statement after statement is left to hang like laundry in the rain, which they just can't be bothered to fetch in. Notably absent from this video was evidence. No sources in the description or ability for anyone to easily check the context of the clips that were shown, which incidentally didn't support their conclusions anyway. And now, having watched the whole video, the overriding thesis seems to be that whether or not the individual is raising legitimate concerns, the institution has the right, in every case, to expel the individual. Not only that, but in their assessment of me, any individual who criticizes the organization of which they are a part is simultaneously a disingenuous bad faith actor to be removed, and also pretending to be a member of the organization. That thinking seems fundamentally flawed to me, not least because criticism is often the route to improvement. There may be a special case to plead for the church if you truly believe it is led by God, but no apologist that I'm aware of would be reckless enough in the face of the church's history as an institution to claim the church and its leaders have not made mistakes.
And to be perfectly frank, there have been times when members or leaders in the church have simply made mistakes.
Therefore, I reserve the right to believe they are continuing to make mistakes now, and thus my role as a member of the church calling attention to those mistakes was justified. My role as a gadfly, I maintain, was necessary. And is it apostasy to draw attention to the church's mistakes in the hope of accountability and improvement? Judging by my excommunication, I'd say the answer is probably yes. But is it a disingenuous act of bad faith? I don't think Jacob and Hayden have successfully made that case at all. Now, for those wanting more details about my excommunication, they are on their way. My excommunication has created some fairly complex legal implications which prevent me from talking openly. But you can rest assured when the time comes, I will be publishing a detailed breakdown of exactly what went on, and as always, I'll bring the receipts. I've also been reflecting on Jacob's invitation to debate, and while I still don't want to debate him, and I think the video we've just watched that he was part of creating is a great example of why a debate with me and Jacob would prove a fruitless endeavour, I do think that a conversation between us could be productive in better understanding one another's positions. I would be willing to be vulnerable and sincere with Jacob if he would be willing to do the same.